with Paul sailing away, starting in Caesarea after over 2 years as a prisoner in Caesarea. And this is, again, just, I love my maps, so here's a map of the overall trip that he ends up taking. Starting out there in Caesarea, he sails up to Sidon. From there, they get into a ship, and then they sail to Myra. And then the commander who is in charge of transporting these prisoners, ship jumps over to a grain ship of Alexandria. So it's an Egyptian ship that's sailing. There's over 276 people on the boat that's sailing, but this is not the right time of the year. This is a bad time of the year. And they already know this. When they try to get there to Cnidus, they struggle. And that's just Myra there. If you look on the map there, Myra. And the winds are already starting to cause them problems. Now, they're able to swing down because the winds push them down under Crete and get into a harbor called Safe Havens. And this is when they have the council, not a little meeting among them, the captain of the ship, and I guess Paul's at least an ear in there listening, and trying to make a determination. Can we get to this other port that is much more favorable for winter? So they know they're not going to make it until winter. They started out late September, 1st of October, so they're going to have to wait till nearly March. But they got to make it over to this little port near Phoenix. Paul's saying we need to stand fast. We need to stay where we're at because, the weather, I just have a feeling that this is going to go bad. So they don't listen to him. And the commander, the centurion, goes ahead and takes the advice of the captain of the ship, which makes sense. Why would you listen to a tent maker versus a sailor? So they attempt it. Doesn't work. As you can see from the little red arrow leaving Fair Havens, immediately they get blown off course and they head over. So that's where we're at. As he has traveled across, they're going to spend 14 days in some of the worst kind of hurricane type of gale storms. I just can't imagine, to the point where the sailors themselves just have lost total control. They've lost total hope. There's no stars. It's pitch black for 14 days. It must have been one of the most horrific situations that I could imagine being on this ship. So just a little map here. I guess I should have used this one to talk to you about it. But the Fair Havens is where but they wanted to get that Phoenix. And you notice the winds blew them like a hook, literally blew them away from where they weren't going to be able to make it over there. And this is the 14-day journey where just right across the Mediterranean, they end up sailing and just out of control as they journey across there. And now we come to the point where the ship is finally approaching, and the people aren't eating. The soldiers and the sailors are not eating, and they're weakened by 14 days of not eating. I can imagine. I mean, the seasickness must have been horrific, and not being able to eat or hold down food. Paul tells them, you need to eat, because we're not going to be able to do this. Now, as they prepare the ship, some of the things that Luke has been doing is showing very clearly how that the nautical, I guess they call it, or sailor or seamanship knowledge that Luke has put into this story, in the way that they took cables and they passed them underneath the boat in strategic locations and then cinch it up. They're pumping water out. They're trying to hold it fast. They're lightening up the tackle that they don't need. They start trying to lighten the boat because the pumping is not fast enough. And it must have been, like I said, not only pitch black, being tossed, thrown around, and then trying to maintain the boat from being overcome with a wave and swamped. And then they're out of control. They don't have any idea where they're going to end up. But Paul does. Remember, Jesus told Paul back in Caesarea, you're going to go stand before the emperor. You're going to go. But so he understands that, but it doesn't mean that Paul doesn't have worries and anxiousness and seasickness along with everybody else. So we're going to pick up there, and as we see, as they lose the ship, and pick up in 39. And one thing that I do want, I put this on my slide here, was 2 Corinthians 11. And the question, it should have been a pop quiz. How many times has Paul been shipwrecked? Well, Paul says in 2 Corinthians 11:25, now Corinthian letter was written before this journey. So to this point in the letter to the Corinth, he says 3 times he's been shipwrecked. And one time floating out in the sea. So this is not, I thought at first Paul, this would be such, not being a sailor, but he did travel a lot by using ships. So, maybe Paul's advice wasn't so ill-advised. Maybe his advice was good, that he had been a passenger. He understood what it was like. But 3 times he's already been shipwrecked. This will make his fourth. All in the sake of serving God. And I just shame myself in thinking, I haven't come close to anything like that. I need to look here. I did not open up on my side. We have it open if you want to make comments, but I did not open it up here. Just in case you have comments, please inject them, questions or anything like that. It would be nice to have you involved in the class this morning. So let's flip this. Get set up. If I had to list some of my biggest fears, I think shipwreck, being in a ship, sinking is one of my worst. Deadliest Catch is one of the horror shows for me. It's like watching Freddy Krueger, those shows, because there's just so much about the ocean and the power of the ocean. So anyway, I do have the social comments up so you can be able to interact with me. And so now, when it was day, this is finally day 15 that we see. When it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and they left them in the sea. At the same time, loosening the ropes, they tied the rudders. Loosening the ropes that tied the rudders and hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. Now, if you remember, as they came out of that storm, they started sensing that they were getting close to land. So what they did was they started doing soundings. Soundings meaning they basically drop a weight with the measurements on the rope, and they drop it down and try to find the bottom. And they started doing this, and they could tell that it was coming up. So they knew they were approaching land. And so immediately, so that they just don't run into ground, they put out all 4 anchors. Now these ships, apparently they were the rear side, I'm not a sailor, the rear end of the ship was the same. So they at times, the sailors could drop 2 from the front anchors and 2 in the back and help to anchor and secure them. So what they're doing is trying to hopefully get an anchor to grab so that it can slow them down and stop them from just hitting something, because they can't see where they're going. It's pitch black. And so they also take the rudder, because the rudders in storms many times could just be ripped apart. And so they secure the rudders, and that's what they're doing here now. That's why I'm backing up and kind of explaining that, because that's what they're doing. They're loosening it up now so that they can now make a deliberate attack towards the beach and try to make the beach. So they bring up that sail, hoping the wind will grab it and drive them towards the beach. But they didn't make it. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground, and the bow stuck and remained immovable. and the stern being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. Remember, Paul had told them that the Lord had spoke to him and said, everyone is going to make this if you'll listen to me. And that's then when he ate, and they took encouragement, and they eat. So everyone is going to be saved. But the soldiers, one of the things with the Romans, if you lost a prisoner, you would be executed. So these soldiers are afraid that if they swim, you'd say, well, we'll catch them later. We can put a bounty on them. But no, because they knew that if they lost control, so any prisoner that might have made it ashore could have cost that soldier's life. So that was the protocol is, well, the ship's going down, and we're not going to risk this, so let's execute him. But the centurion stops him. So there's a providence there going on. This centurion is a good man. We've already looked at some of his character, and I think that it's kind of neat to see the kindness that he shows Paul throughout the trip. And I think it shows some tenderness and compassion. I mean, he could have had everyone else, killed, and himself just secure Paul. Remember, there's Articus from Thessalonica, and then there's Luke as well. We know at a minimum when it says prisoners plural, but to me, Luke is not a prisoner. He's accompanying him. Articus is not a prisoner either, so I'm not quite sure how many other prisoners may have been, but the centurion stops them from doing that. And then he ordered all those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest on planks and pieces of the ship. And so it was. They were all brought safely to the land. So the centurion this makes sense in a catastrophic situation, that the centurion, being the commander and being under a lot of combat, seeing a lot of combat, knew how to make decisions and execute quickly and give good directions. So everybody can swim, go. If you can't swim, get on something that can float and make it. And so they all make it. I mean, this is a pretty miraculous situation in itself. I mean, and not in a God type of miraculous, but just in the nature of shipwrecks and such. And then for people who don't know how to swim, you don't have safety lifeboats, they cut that loose, remember? And life vests and such. To have everyone survive is way above. Well, good morning, Eileen. I'm glad to see you guys made it. So yeah, jump in on the conversation, people, while we're having the class. So I'm a desert rat, so a lot of this sea stuff does kind of frighten me, and I keep bringing that up. Now, they're on the island, but remember, they didn't recognize where they were at, which, if you think about it, I mean, you have these sailors, they have sailed all over the Mediterranean, and they can't recognize it. So what does that tell us? Is this a new island or something? No, it's that this is not a normal direction in which a ship would ever go. They are on the backside on a location where ships, they don't travel. Now, this is also a grain ship. So, these guys are from Alexandria, Egypt. So a lot of times, why would they ever sail around that area? So they can't tell anybody where they're going to land. This is literally a speck in the ocean. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a beautiful island today, if you go and look. And it's very interesting on the politics and citizenship and stuff. There's a lot of people going to Malta in there. And so it's kind of neat to look in the idea that they were sitting there for 14 days, just out of control, out in the middle of the Mediterranean in pure darkness. And then when they finally do start to discover they're on land, they're lost. This little bitty, kind of zooming in with another map, looking at Sicily. And they're like, it's just the fact that they were even being brought towards if you looked at the prevailing winds and the storms coming from the north, they lost total control. There's something a little providential here that seems to bring them right up there to the island of Malta. So So after they are brought safely to the land, and starting in chapter 28 now, after we are brought safely through, we then learn that the island was called Malta. The native people showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and they welcomed us, because it had begun to rain and was cold. When Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and put them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened on his hand. And when the native people saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, "No doubt this man was a murderer. Though he has escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live." He, however, shook the creature off into the fire and suffered no harm. So they land on the island. The people are very nice to them. And then as they're building this fire to get comfortable and dry, they gathering up wood, and a viper bites Paul, gets him. This is a venomous. The natives know this is a dead man's snake. You're not going to survive from this. And this is the superstition that is really, I think, kind of universal when it comes to bad things happening to people. It's too often we are pretty quick to judging people that if something horrible happens to them, is there somehow, are they responsible? Is this something that they've done? Are they contributing to this? The extreme would be, this is a judgment, that whatever bad thing is happening is a judgment. You remember Jesus was asked about the tower that had collapsed. There was a tower that collapsed and killed some Jews and such. And Jesus was asked, well, whose sin was it? Was this something because of sin? And no, Jesus said no. So it's, now, if you sit and look at the prophets, you'd say, well, God did bring about some punishments catastrophically that were signs to get people to turn back to him. But no, that's why I say, I don't think we could ever have confidence in looking at somebody and saying, God is bringing a judgment upon you. Now, you can have situations of, making bad decisions, but I don't think you should ever try to look at somebody and go, wow, it's because, like they told about Paul, this man must be a murderer because, he's supposed to have drowned. He should have drowned and not made it to the beach. But he did. So the gods, remember, these are people who are under the influence of multi-gods and the Greek gods and the Roman gods and stuff. So that it's like, well, then the gods couldn't get you there. So now this is how justice will be carried out. But no harm comes to him. Does that remind you of something, being bit by a viper in some other scripture or something? You're smiling.
I don't know if I'm thinking about the same thing you're.
That's okay.
I remember back in the Old Testament when
Oh.
Israel were disobedient and complaining about something, and then serpents came out and started fighting and attacking them, and Moses had to hold up a serpent, the golden serpent,
Mm-hmm. And if you looked upon it, you were healed. That was your antivenom. Yeah, it was kind of like your antivenom. So, that was kind of a judgment, wasn't it? These vipers came out and started killing people and biting them. That's what I mean. I can't universally just say that these things don't happen and God doesn't do them. But now look at the difference. One, this is one man, snake bites him, and immediately he personally is judged. You look at what God is doing, that was a national type of infliction of all the vipers and such. So that's why we shouldn't get in the business of this but it's easy to do. I mean, come on. When you hear of a tragedy today, when you read in the news and you see something happen and people are hurt or something horrific happens, you kind of wonder, what was he doing at 2 a.m? Couldn't be anything good. Well, maybe he's driving his mama to the emergency room. you know what? This actually happened. This is a true story. This fits so well. There was a man who was found, and this has been within a year, 2 years, at a single car crash on an overpass of Loman. They take him up to the emergency department and they pronounce him dead. They don't know why, send him off to the OMI, have autopsy. They can't figure it out. And so they assumed that there was just some drug overdose or something like that. Well, so the papers came out and it really started looking like, oh yeah, another one of those guys that was, out doing bad things late at night. Well, I'm not going to impugn his motive because, yeah, he did, but he was out. But what happened was there was a drive-by out in Doniana, and somebody shot him with a .22, and it went right under the armpit. And he was trying to get to the hospital, and he crashed. You see how that turned? People automatically assumed that it was a drug overdose because he had tattoos. And so when they pronounced him dead, it was like, oh yeah, I was working as a paramedic, and I remember I didn't respond to that, but that's what they were kind of saying. Yeah, he was, we tried CPR, he was dead. But nobody saw that little bitty hole that went under his armpit. And he was trying to get to the hospital. See how that happened? So this is what we see here with Paul, is that automatically the people go, well, he must be a murderer. Well, there's another verse I was thinking of, but that was a good one. So was the idea of Paul being bitten and no harm to him. Look at what Jesus said in Mark 16:18 when he gave that great commission. And he said, go and make disciples, preach, and teach the gospel, and those who believe and are baptized shall be saved, and those who don't will be condemned. And then he says, and these are the signs. You're going to go out with signs. You're going to be able to do these things. And then he says in 18, he says, and they will pick up serpents with their hands, and if they drink any deadly poison, it will not hurt them, and they will lay hands on the sick, and they will recover. Pick up serpents, Paul? I don't know how far you go with that, but it's like, that was a sign that he was of God. I don't know if they ever flash back, but that was that also here, I think helps support if you want to go down the rabbit hole about miracles and purpose of miracles and such. And the whole context, again, starting in Mark 15 all the way through here, is around the idea of taking the gospel out, teaching it to people, and then teaching the whole counsel of the gospel. And the way that they would be able to know it is because these men were going to be able to perform miracles. And that would confirm. That was the purpose of them, not to, any other reason. So they were waiting for him to swell up and suddenly fall down dead. Just sitting around, But when they had waited a long time and they saw no misfortune to come to him, they changed their minds and they said, he's a god. I don't know how many around there. I know rattlesnakes, they a lot of times, matter of fact, quite a few of the bites are what they call dry bites. They don't inject. I learned that when I was going through, paramedic training and looking at venomous like snakes and spiders and stuff. We had a guy come in and he was teaching us snakes, and he brought some in. I was like, dude, no, pictures are good, man. I don't like snakes. And he was talking about that a lot of times they won't inject because it's an enzyme. It's meant to strike something to eat. And so there's another strike that they will strike to defend. So not always that way. The other thing is they have multiple fangs that will be growing. So sometimes you'll see it looks like 2 sets, and they'll say, oh, well, it got bit twice. Not so. Sometimes the 2 will hit. Anyway, I chase off on that. But so it doesn't mean everybody who got necessarily bit. I don't know about this type of a snake here, but they're waiting for judgment to be fulfilled, and it doesn't. And instead of so this guy Paul has gone from a murderer to a god. in a matter of maybe an hour. This isn't the first time, is it? We know that, before they have tried to worship the apostles, and they've had to rebuke that and tell them, get up, I'm just a man just like you. So it's a good direction to look. I mean, if you think about it, I used to really think these people are being really silly when they looked at the apostles and said they were a god. But it's not so bad, because what does that tell you when somebody says that like the apostles being a god? It shows you their belief in something supernatural, something beyond nature that no one could perform or do. And then they were able to take that and say, yeah, but we're not the God, he's the God. So it shows you that idea that they believed, at least, they were religious. Now we're getting just what happens on the island in 7 and 8. And now in the neighborhood of the place where the lands belonging to the chief of the island, named Publius, who received us and entertained us hospitality for 3 days. It happened that the father of Publius lay sick with fever and dysentery. And Paul visited him and prayed and put his hands on him and healed him. And when this had taken place, the rest of the people on the island who had diseases also came and were cured. They also honored us greatly. And when we were about to sail, they put on board whatever we needed. There's nothing about the gospel being taught. Isn't that interesting? This is to me, remember when they went to Crete on the first journey and they get there and people are being healed and the sick and stuff, and then we find out, the conversions. And now but it's interesting. But I think the assumption, because we know the link between the miracles and the teaching of the gospel, they're interconnected. One's not going to happen without the other. So the gospel is being taught. And it's the same one you can jump back and go back into the book there and look at. So now Paul's going to set sail. We're going to go ahead, and next week we're going to stop there this morning. I have to do a lot more reconfiguring between services because we've got some technical things happening, but I'm glad you're able to be with us this morning. If you would, now go ahead and read chapter 28. It's kind of short, but there's a lot of powerful messages in that we'll look at and probably wrap up Acts. All right, well, and we're going to be here at 10:45 for worship, 4 p.m. this afternoon. We're still looking at that great little book called Amos. And then in midweek, we're still looking at Moses on the Exodus. So until we see you again, God bless you. Better already. And then I guess we went home and did the test. I turned it off. There. I just turned it off. Yeah. Oh, I guess we're still live then. Well, yeah, we're still streaming. We didn't say anything bad, did we?